Someone would get the original manga in Japan, scan it with a scanner. They'd send it to these guys. They were almost always in the US. So it'd just be like a normal English sentence with just random Japanese words put in.
Like, you are my nakama.
Yeah. It's all going according to keikaku and stuff like that, yeah.
Hey guys, welcome back to the KoreKara podcast. This week we talked to Ethan O Brien, who is a professional Japanese translator. We talk about the intricacies of translating, what it takes to become a translator, and his personal journey with Japanese.
But as you guys know, you got to go translate this and follow us on Twitter.
I hope you guys enjoy the podcast. Ethan, can you give us a quick background of who you are and where you're at today?
Yeah, so I moved to Japan in 2016 after I graduated university, and I worked there for over 3 years, and then I came back to Ireland to do my master's in translation studies, so Japanese to English, and then stuff hit. I was supposed to go back to Japan, so I've been staying in Ireland doing translation work for Japanese companies.
You wrote it like a dissertation about translation, right?
Yeah, so part of the master's was, well, I was interested in like Japanese media translation. I didn't know if that's what I'd get to do afterwards, but I was like, in the master's we can do whatever we want, so you may as well do whatever you're interested in, kind of thing. Basically, translation studies is essentially trying to analyze translations, trying to like break down the decision-making process, and what, say, back in the 15th century, it would be like super literal because they thought if they're translating the Bible, it's the word of God, it has to be exactly whatever way it was written. To then, over time, people are like, well, maybe we should do it a bit more this way. And then some other people somewhere else being like, we should do it more this way. So there's all these like people who have different lenses of like analyzing translations different ways. So what we had to do is basically pick a topic we like and then choose a lens that made sense for analyzing that, and then analyze some work, get like a few different works, analyze them, and that would be your dissertation. You could also do like an extended translation project, but I was kind of more interested in analyzing stuff because I thought you can kind of learn more that way rather than just doing something yourself. My professor, actually, he's a big kind of expert on rakugo. So he's written books about like the Osaka comedy scene and things like this. So I was kind of talking about ideas with him, and he knew some guys who did manga translation, and I was kind of talking to them as well through email, and I was kind of trying to figure out what topic would be interesting. And something I was always interested in was kind of scanlation versus like official translation, because there's like so much discussion about that online. A lot of people who maybe grew up reading scanlations, they maybe don't like official translations sometimes because they're more used to scanlations.
Can you define what are scanlations?
Right, yeah. So scanlations are essentially, someone would get the original manga in Japan. Back in the old days, they used to literally like scan it with a scanner. They'd send it to these guys. They were almost always in the US. They would then use like old school photo editing software to like remove all the Japanese text, and then they would themselves translate that. And like back in, let's say like the 80s and 90s, that was, for a lot of people, that was like the only way they could read manga because it wasn't distributed in the US, it wasn't distributed anywhere else. So that's what it started as for a while, and then a lot of those like scanlators back in those days ended up working for like Viz and all these like major publishers as like in-house translators. And then later what started happening was like more when like manga was really starting to boom, say in like the early to mid 2000s, it was more about like people just wanted more now for free, essentially. So what you would have is, whereas before it might be hard to access manga, it was like people could access manga more now, but people wanted it faster and they wanted it like the same day it came out in Japan or something like that. So you'd get these groups that would like organize online, and they'd say, okay, we're going to, the next Naruto that comes out, we're going to get it and we're going to translate it first and we're going to put it up online, and then tons of people are going to read it. And a lot of what they do is like host them on their own website or something so they could get like ad revenue and stuff like this. Some didn't, but some did do that. And then so it became this thing where before it was like, okay, no one had access to it, and now we're translating it so that people have access to it, to now groups kind of trying to get it done as quickly as they could so that they would get like the most clout essentially. And that became a really big thing, and a lot of like Bleach and Naruto and One Piece and stuff like this would be scanlated and uploaded really fast, and then people would read those. So you could imagine like these were amateur groups, and especially if your aim is speed, you know, it's obviously going to be a very different end product to someone who's doing it with the idea that we've got like whatever amount of time, we have to get the highest quality we can in that amount of time, and we're gonna like have like a pipeline of people and editors and proofreaders and stuff to get it perfect by the end of that. It became like a very different thing. So I was analyzing those scanlations essentially. I was like looking at the scanlated version, looking at the official translated version, and kind of analyzing them and seeing like what are the difference, like what kind of different decisions get made when someone's trying to do it online for free as fast as they can versus someone who's maybe a professional translator now. Maybe they used to do that in the past, like a lot of them did, but now they're working in-house for like a publisher on this stuff. And it was super interesting because, you know, a lot of people make fun of the fact that with Scanlations, they'd be like, there's a lot of screenshots of this, there'd be like just Japanese words just thrown into sentences, right? So it'd just be like a normal English sentence with just random Japanese words put in.
Like, you are my nakama.
Yeah. It's all going according to keikaku and stuff like that, yeah.
Oh, that's a classic right there.
Yeah, exactly. So like, those things, when you look at them, you're like, oh, that's really weird. Like, why would they do that? But there's obviously a reason. And the reason, well, one reason is kind of, I guess, kind of gatekeeping, kind of like, oh, look, if you're in the group of people who are like super into this stuff, you're going to know what that means, because we all know what that means, you know? And but another thing of it is, when you really get into it, a lot of like scanlation is obviously anonymous, right? So like, you don't interact with the person who does that. That person isn't making like YouTube videos telling you how you should translate stuff. So like, the text itself is essentially kind of like a teaching manual, because it has like, they'll translate a sentence and then below they'll have like asterisks and notes like explaining like their thinking processes and stuff like this. Yeah, exactly.
Nakama means friend.
But even like some of the like cultural stuff, it's like, it's very like hit and miss. Sometimes they do this and sometimes they don't. It really depends. Let's say someone's reading these Scanlations in 2005 and they're really into them, right? They're like learning through reading it. Like, they're basically learning the style guide for Scanlations by reading these things and reading all these notes. And then they pick it up, and then they're the next ones to do it. And then they're doing the same thing. So they're writing all these notes, they're like explaining all this stuff, and then the next readers are doing it. So it becomes this thing where it's like, for like the Scanlation to continue, they kind of have to do it that way. Because if you don't explain your thinking process and you don't like show your work, it's just going to end with you. And like, these people, they don't do it for very long. They'll do it for like 1-2 years, because like, who's going to do that much work for free when you're an adult with a job, essentially, you know? So yeah, it was really interesting, because it just wasn't what I expected. Like,
people are just like, oh, like, it's just really bad, it's just whatever.
But there's a lot of reasons why that kind of stuff, the way they do things that way, stays that way, I think, beyond just they don't know how to translate it or something, which sometimes does happen. I mean, like, sometimes I analyze them and there'd be passages where you're like, oh, this guy just did not understand this, and they just wrote something that they thought fit the conversation. Like, that definitely does happen sometimes. But yeah, it was super
like,
interesting.
Write words in to people's mouths.
Yeah.
Wait, I feel like that even happens for professional ones, because I've seen that on Netflix. Or maybe Netflix doesn't have professional translators. I don't know how that works.
It's weird with Netflix. I've never done anything with Netflix, but I've heard it can be pretty tough. I don't know. Subtitles and dubs gets really weird, because there's so much like limitations. And I think as well with games, a lot of people don't realize you have like extremely limited space on the screen. Like, I'm not sure what it is for Netflix, but like, let's say for like a lot of games and stuff, it'll be like 48 characters per line and like 2 lines. And if you get like 2 lines of Japanese that's like just compound kanji, like there's no way you're going to be able to write every bit of information out in 48 characters. So there's a lot of that stuff as well. Yeah. Or it would take like, you know, they say something in like 1 second and like it takes like 10 seconds to get through all the
screen. And a bunch of asterisks. Like only
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or just pauses and then like an audio description comes up and explains everything to you. Yeah. You know, you see that kind of stuff and you think like the person's first instinct obviously is, oh, there's something weird going on. They mustn't have understood it, or they have a really weird style or something like that. But then a lot of times when you look at the inner workings of it, there's probably some good reasons. There isn't always a good reason. But
are there guidelines for like dubs in general? Because like if you watch any like American show dubbed in Japanese, it's like the way they speak, or like even just like if you look at a script, it's extremely dramatic. It's like highly exaggerated and not like realistic. And I wonder if that's like on purpose.
It's different for everyone. So like, especially with Netflix, their style guides for subtitling and dubbing and everything are actually online to see, because I think they have a lot of freelancers. So like, I think like basically they all just kind of try and do the same style guide. But I've seen like some anime shows where what they do is you've got like the original script, then that gets translated. So like normally it would be like, you know, there's a translator and then there's an editor who goes and reads like in parallel to make sure like nothing's off or whatever. And then you've got a proofreader who just reads like the target text to check there's no grammar or style mistakes or whatever the style guide is. But then with like a lot of shows, what they do is they've got like a person who adapts that. So like the translation's been done, but then you've got like a show writer who basically is like rewrites it. Like they're not going to look at the original text at all. They're just going to rewrite it so that it like sounds good and sounds natural in that language. It doesn't happen for every show, but it does happen for some shows. And that's probably why when you see that and you see like, if you look at the Japanese one and then you look at the English one, you're like, there's like some big leaps happening here. It's like the translator probably didn't do that. It's probably like there was an additional writer at the end who was like changing stuff to make it flow better or make it work better for the audience.
Oh, I guess like how good do you think you have to be to start translating? And like how good would you say your own Japanese is like today?
Yeah, that's a really hard one. And I remember when like I was in my MA, I asked my one of the lecturers that, and they were like, it really depends on the person. There's so many factors, because I think the biggest thing with most people is of like a lot of it is research skills. Like how good are your research skills? Because like you can be like decent at reading, but if you can like spot, like it depends. Like some people will not spot when they misunderstand something. But then other people will be like, I don't understand this. I think this phrase is different from what I think it is. And they'll double, triple check it. And they'll like find out what for sure it is. And so if you think about it that way, someone could be like really, really good at Japanese. And they're like flying through the stuff. But if they're not like good at identifying like when they maybe don't understand 100%, or maybe when something sounds off, but someone's not as good, but they're like always able to tell when they don't have it 100% and they check it, that person, do you know what I mean? So it depends. It's like a balance between like the language skills and the research skills. In terms of my level, it's very hard to tell, because it's like the goalposts always move. Like I remember like when I started, if I could get to as good as I am now, I would have like been like, yeah, I'll just quit. Like I don't need to get any better. But it's like it never ends. There's always like there's no you do not know everything in the world. There's no way you know everything about every topic, you know? Like when I hear people say like, oh man, I'm done, I know like everything now. It's like, do you know programming language? Do you know about baseball? Do you know about gardening or cooking or this or that? Like there's so many topics. So it's like, I'd say in terms of like reading comprehension, because I do like a lot of reading, basically like full.
But have you taken the JLPT?
I only N2 because that's what I needed to do to get into my MA, and then since then
I see.
I've just been working, so I never needed any other one. Yeah, the N2 I didn't find that hard because I kind of figured out with the JLPT, it's like I said, it's like you could be like super fluent at Japanese, right? But like you just watch sports all day. And then like if you went and did the JLPT, like you might fail because you don't read newspapers, you know? Whereas like I feel like the JLPT, it's like a lot of newspaper articles and newspaper editorials is what it reads like. So when I wanted to do the JLPT, I don't think I did any study books or anything to do with the JLPT. I think what I did was in the run-up, I was reading like newspaper articles. I would like download them onto my Kindle and stuff and read through them. That was it. I think that's all I did.
The secret to becoming a translator. Put the newspapers on the Kindle.
That is it. That's it. That's 90% of it.
And
then,
One
like,
Punch Man.
And one, yeah, that's basically it. But like, I think with the translator thing, like you said about like the Japanese skill, I think maybe like a lot of people would think that's the number one thing, but you've also got to think, what's everyone reading? They're reading your writing. So like your writing has to be good. And I think that's the biggest thing I learned in my MA was like, I think when I was starting, I was like focusing so much on the Japanese and I was like immersing like crazy because I was like, I have to get like super, super good. But then at a point when I had to like output English and I had to like write English and I had to like write for all these characters, I realized that was my biggest limitation. And so like I spent like a while really trying to get better at that. And I think that's what made the biggest difference in the end.
Immersing in English.
Immersing in English, yeah.
The key to Japanese. The key to Japanese fluency.
It is true though. Like if you think about it, right? Like let's say if there's some topic, whatever like this series is about, right? You have to know about it in the target language. Like you have to know. Like, let's say if you were, I don't watch baseball, I don't know why I keep saying this, but let's say you were like translating baseball shows, right? Like you'd have to know all the baseball terminology. Like you could be insane at Japanese and like know all the terms in Japanese, but if you don't know them in English, or if you're not good, if you don't know what kind of style people tend to use in the English, it's like, it's pointless, you know? Someone who does know a ton about baseball, but maybe doesn't have as good a level of Japanese, but still understands it, will do way better because their writing is just way better.
That's true. There's definitely, I guess, sticking with the baseball example, it's expressed differently in a lot of ways in Japanese compared to English for sure. But I mean, with you so hooked on baseball, I really wonder. I mean, is that the next step in your translation journey, becoming a baseball expert, Ethan?
No, I literally don't know anything about baseball. I don't know why I keep saying that. Maybe because like people are like, it's like the biggest sport in Japan. But like,
there's a lot of like specific words in for baseball specifically in Japanese.
Yeah, I even noticed it with football because I like to watch a lot of football. So when I was over in Japan, you could watch everything on like DAZN for nothing. Like over here, like watching football costs a fortune, but over there you can watch it on DAZN for nothing. And like you could watch it with all the Japanese commentary, and like they all had like their own individual terms for all the stuff, like all the different types of shots, all the different types of like plays and stuff. They had like, they didn't borrow it from English. They had like their totally own different way of saying it. So it's like you could imagine like if you were trying to like speak to someone about football in Japanese and you were like trying to like in your head translate it from the English, like it would not work at all. Like you need to know the terms they all use.
That's when you use the asterisk.
Yeah, that's when you get like you're in life. Like we need to get like if you get like the meta glasses or something like that, we can have like pop-ups with like footnotes next to what we say.
Is that the new age of
alerts.
translation? You're just gonna have footnotes ready to go. Meta's gonna go and take your job away for putting your asterisks.
That's the thing though, it's like when you're doing like official stuff, like you never get to put like footnotes or explanations or anything in anything.
Right.
I don't think. I know there was a bit of time, I think it was like when that transition was happening between like the old style and now, where people used to get away with that, but like now you don't. So that can make stuff tough, right? Because like you'll always see this. There'll always be a decision when there's like a specific Japanese thing where they have two choices. It's like you can use the Japanese word like spelt in Romaji, and then like cleverly afterwards, without anyone noticing, like describe what it is in English, right? Which is usually the best way to go because it like reads much more naturally. Right. Or if there is a commonly used translation, you can just like switch it over to whatever. But I had that recently. There was like I was working on something and there was this like structure, and I was like, what is this? It's like it was between like two types of buildings, and I was like, there's no way, like it's not this and it's not this, and if I say it's this, no one's gonna understand what I mean. So I eventually like had to use the Japanese term for it and then like kind of easily explain what it is.
Hide the asterisk.
Hide the asterisk. Just like use a comma and just like kind of naturally explain what the building is. So
the New Age way of doing it.
Yeah,
all the
and you
people
see that
who
a
don't
lot.
know what keikaku means, they're safe. They're safe.
Yeah, the Japanese art of keikaku, comma, which means making a plan.
Oh, that's pretty. That was pretty clean execution right there.
That's basically what I do all day. That's what I get paid for.
Do you think one day like translation work will disappear when you can just use like a computer?
Yeah, no.
It's pretty good now. I've seen some like AI.
I know, but like, especially for like games and stuff, like you just can't. I know, like, so my stance on it is this, because I did do a module on them in university. For all those like DeepL and Google Translate, they're really all being made for like quick like business emails and stuff like that. That's what they're being made for. It's like, oh listen, we've got this meeting tomorrow with people over in France. We need to send them this email. We don't have time. We've no one here that can like quickly do this small little email. So that's really what they're for. And that's why you see like on singular sentences and like stuff that doesn't really need specific context, it can be perfect, right? It can be like really, really good. But when you're talking about like, if you're working on a game with like specific characters who all have their own specific speaking style, they all have like specific backstories. They might have like skills and buffs and items that all have specific names that have to be like consistent throughout the whole game. It all has to be like capitalized a certain way, you know. Paragraphs, everything have to be formatted a certain way. It's like, I don't see how, especially the context with like backstories and like conversations between people and a lot of that nuance, like I just can't see that happening. I honestly think that won't happen until you have like AI singularity, because like language is like such a human thing. It's like we basically make it. It's just like our brains just make it, and we're just born to do that. Unless like a machine can like replicate the thought processes of a person and the emotional responses, like I just can't see it happening. For
you need the Weeb AI to come through.
So that'll be like a horrible day. It's like AI singularity will happen, Skynet will happen, and I'll be out of a job. Like it'll just be the worst day. Everything will just be done.
Oh man, we wouldn't talk about it like that. But I mean, I guess within that scope though, is there anything, because I mean within the scope of Japanese specifically, there's so much that you can be translating, and we talked about games, we talked about baseball, which is not necessarily as relevant, but is there anything that you kind of want to be going towards translating?
I have to say, like, I do think games is the most interesting. I think they're so complicated and there's so many moving parts. I think a lot of people as well, they get it in their mind that, like, if you're translating a game, you can see the game and see the way it's going to play out, and you absolutely can't. Like, you basically just get a file of items, a file of character names, you know, a file of dialogue here and there. You don't see them in context, you don't see them in game or anything like that. So it's like it's a very tricky puzzle to try and figure out that sort of stuff. So I find it the most interesting. But in terms of like something I'd like to do, I've done games. I've done like console games, PC games, mobile games, visual novels. I got to work a small part on a book. So the only thing I haven't done is like audio visual. I haven't done like an anime. I haven't done like a TV show. I haven't done subbing or dubbing. So that would be like super cool. I think subbing would be kind of similar to games because, you know, games is going to be like similar. Like you've got 2 lines of text. You've got this sort of character limit. It's dialogue. That's quite similar. But the dubbing I think would be a lot tougher because you've got that really tight time limit and you've got to like think about like syllables and how long it's going to take someone to say something and the way they're going to say it. Right. I think that's really tough. I think, you know, that there's a lot more limitations there, but it'd be super cool to do like once.
Yeah, but I think, Ethan, that's a great place to go and call it right here. I think that was amazing going through this entire journey in terms of translation. But I know that there's one other thing that you've been going through during your entire journey of translation. Yeah, you've been translating one message in particular all the way since you started learning Japanese and went through translation school all the way up until now, and that's the KoreKara message. I know you've been working really hard to translate that one, so now I'm going to put you on the spot to go and have you translate it live here. So Ethan, what is your KoreKara message?
I guess my message is, you know, when I was in university first, I did fine art and I was just kind of doing my degree, doing kind of not knowing what I wanted to do. And I just kind of went to Japan on a whim and then just ended up doing what I liked. You know, I just liked language learning. I was interested in media already. I kind of just went with that, and I obviously applied myself a lot to learn the language, but at the same time, you know, you just kind of have to do what you like. If there's something you're really into, if language learning is your thing, you know, don't put too much pressure on yourself. It really is a marathon when some people try and make it a sprint. Do what you enjoy, just keep at it. If you don't enjoy it, you know, try something else. Just probably, you know, maybe I'll like baseball more. I don't know. But then just, you know, keep going, do what you enjoy, and yeah, I think you'll succeed if every day you're just enjoying yourself, and then you won't quit. You'll just keep going.
Hey guys, thanks for making it to the end of the podcast. Comment down below, what was the last thing you've read that was translated?
Of course, I gotta go translate the patrons here. Cedric, Rory, Faraz, Kevin, Alan, Jaron, Drew, Jack, Joey, K, Shiny, Meredith, MKSXN, Polar, Suzu, Yui, Sad Boy, and Britverse Japan.